First of all, my name is Joanne Borgstein. I'm one of the course co-directors with Dr. Fabrizio Ambrosio, and we heartily welcome you to Boston. We did arrange to have good weather for tomorrow, so don't worry. And I'd like to take this time to welcome everyone to Regenerative Rehabilitation 2024. I'm a native here from Boston, part of the Harvard faculty and head of sports medicine and our regenerative sports medicine program for Mass General Brigham. This is the 10th annual International Symposium on Regenerative Rehabilitation, and we are so grateful for everybody who's here, locally, nationally, and internationally. This is the 10th anniversary event here in Boston, and we are most grateful also to Harvard Medical School and to Spaulding Rehabilitation Hospital for hosting us for this year's symposium. Over the next 2.5 days, you can expect to learn about cutting-edge basic and translational research in the domain of regenerative rehabilitation. These presentations will be rigorous and thoughtful science material, as well as clinical perspective. We are very confident that you're going to find this year's meeting a memorable event. A little bit of housekeeping. If you've not already done so, please download the meeting app, and this will allow you to view the agenda, make social connections, see the speakers' bios, and all. There's a QR download code posted out at the registration desk, as well as an on-site program booklet. It is also my pleasure and honor to introduce Dr. Ross Zafont. Dr. Zafont is the president of Spaulding Rehabilitation Network, the professor and chair of the Harvard Department of PM&R, the chair of the departments of PM&R at Mass General and Brigham. This takes a while, so don't worry about it. The senior vice president for medical affairs. I'm going. I should go double speed here just to get through it all. Research and education at Spaulding Rehabilitation Network. He's written and edited the textbook in the field of brain injury medicine. He's funded by all the relevant national funding sources, NIH, DOD, and NIDA. His research has dealt with mechanisms of recovery after brain and spinal cord injury, and he's our primary investigator for the Football Players Health Study and the Home Base Program. He's authored over 300 peer-reviewed publications. He's editor-in-chief, the Journal of the AOA. You can't get out this quickly. Wait. Okay. I'm not done. I have to tell you, I've been at Spaulding longer than you, so I get a moment.
She does.
I do. All right.
Prerogative.
It's the
Harvard Club.
I don't know how long you've been our chair, probably 15 to 17 years. And
Can't you tell I'm a poster child for apoptosis?
And I have never seen a bigger and more impressive and important growth in a department and a rehabilitation hospital and a research enterprise as has happened in these past 17 years. And not only that, whether I call you at 4 o'clock in the morning or 8 o'clock at night or whatever, you're always there personally and professionally for everyone in your department, and we cherish you. So thank you for all that.
Joanne, with her overly kind comments, reflective of the fact that I'm manic. But I really want to thank all of you for being here. This is an incredibly important conference in a historic place. Not only does this represent in some ways the environment that founded our country, but this was one of the stops for President Kennedy, for John Quincy Adams. It is the quintessential part of American discovery. We are obligated in some ways, I think all, to do a little better. And all of you in regenerative medicine and your interest there compels us to do that. 26% of the United States has some form of disability now, and that number's going to grow as we all age. We're not going to bend the curve and improve health span unless we facilitate the research that is being thought about here. And that goes not only for bending the clinical curve and the outcomes of our patients, but innovation will help bend the cost curve that is inexorable. So I really want to welcome you all to this incredible historic place. I think they'll let you see some of the other stuff around here. We have used this for years as a site for some of our events, and I'm so proud that all of you are here, and I hope you really experience what I think Drs. Borgstein and Ambrosio have planned, which is a remarkable couple of days. Thank you so much.
I feel like this should be graduation, but anyway, it is my pleasure to bring up our course co-director, Dr. Fabrizio Ambrosio, who's also the director of our Musculoskeletal Discovery Center of the Research Institute at Spalding Rehab, and has now twice been recruited by Dr. Zafont in her career. So welcome.
As clinicians and researchers, we all aim to innovate. As clinicians, while many times we will encounter patients that present in the typical and expected patterns, so often the clinic is home to the unknowns and mysteries, cases that are unlike anything we have seen before. And so to be truly effective and comprehensive in really addressing the singular needs of each individual patient, it really demands a certain flexibility of thinking, creativity, and a truly innovative spirit. Similarly, for the researchers, innovation and creativity is baked into everything that we do. It really serves as so much of the metrics of how well we are doing in our work in terms of grants and manuscripts. Innovation and creativity are really at the key. So this being the case, then, it's only natural to ask ourselves, where do creative ideas come from? And how can we cultivate an innovative spirit in our work? Today, we will take a very broad view in answering this question. And in fact, we will ask these questions from the lens of the art world. It is my tremendous pleasure to introduce to you today our keynote speaker, Ana Castillo. Ana is an exquisite artist, and I can say this because I have been to her exhibits. She is really magnificently talented. Ana is also an art educator and an art historian. From the first time I met Ana, I remember it well, I was so compelled by her passion for the craft that very night that I met her, I asked if she would be willing to come and speak to our lab. And the idea here was, could she come and speak to our group about her own experiences, to teach us how to look more deeply and how to see things differently. We were so blown away by Ana's presentations that as we were starting to prepare for this 10th anniversary event, it was obvious that Ana would be an ideal choice for our keynote talk tonight. So with that, I hope you will join me in giving a very warm welcome to Ana, where she'll present her keynote lecture tonight.
Well, thank you so much for that kind introduction. It's really wonderful to be presenting to all of you. And I'm really quite honored to be one of the keynote speakers among such an impressive group of people. This image represents the scientist Louis Pasteur in his laboratory. And as we see here, frequently we imagine the groundbreaking discoveries occurring in isolation. We often attribute the spontaneous explosions of creativity and the eureka moments that occur in the solitude of the studio as characteristics of the scientist, the artist, the philosopher, and the author. There are many cliches surrounding creative professions. And yes, I include the sciences in this category. But surely, this image of the scientist working in isolation might feel outdated to you. But what happens if I ask you, as scientist, about how the creative process works in the arts? I am sure you imagine the artist seeking inspiration in the sublime and in adversity, and then pouring out his or her feelings in the solitude of the studio. Something like this. But even when we advance our work in physical seclusion, would we really say that the product of our work emerges and develops in solitude and independence from others? This romantic notion of the genius as a channel of almost divine inspiration is a construct inherited for a different era. What we interpret as solitary genius is usually nothing more than a series of privileged circumstances that accompanies the careers of certain artists, usually male artists. That is, men who, for example, were independently wealthy, who did not have to care for others, and who usually had someone to cover their needs. This guy on the right probably doesn't do his own laundry. And I don't think this specific cliché is still valid in the sciences. Today, the scientific community is a global network of researchers where there's frequent communication between colleagues and access to new materials and techniques. The academic world today is specialized and recognizes that there's a need for multidisciplinary teams to tackle big global projects. But the art world was and still is a cult of the individual. And we don't have to go back far to the past. The 20th century has given great figures that embodied, if not actually reinforced, popular ideas of the artist as a brilliant, quirky individualist. Some examples that might be familiar to you are Picasso, Dalí, Pollock. And of these, Pollock, I think, is the only one I could imagine doing his own laundry. But despite the persistent stereotype of the artist as an individualistic genius, there is actually a long history of collaboration in art that is often not recognized by anyone other than art historians and artists. Since the Middle Ages and until the 17th, 18th century, the craft of the arts was dominated by a workshop system. We have assumed that the artist's work process looked like this, when in reality, their workspace has always looked more like this. Aspiring artists entered established artist workshops as apprentices to learn the trade. They started at a very young age and usually worked in a system where labor on the part of the student was exchanged for training, shelter, and food. Upon reaching certain level, when moving from apprentice to assistant, they would receive a salary that was normally established in a contract regulated by the town's guild. Apprentices usually began with chores like cleaning the studio, preparing paints and materials, while spending some time learning the basics of the craft. This engraving is, in fact, an extraordinary example of what a workshop consisted of. So this is the master painter, because he's painting a history painting, a St. George defeating a dragon. Here are two apprentices who are mulling the pigments into paint. Here is another one who's preparing the palette for the master. And this other one is practicing drawing eyes. Here on the left, there's another individual who's painting a portrait and who must be an assistant, not an apprentice. Most likely, the portrait itself was painted by the master, and what the assistant is doing is painting the drapery, the background, and other secondary elements. This practice has been the norm in history of art. When we see this type of large paintings, this one is about 8 by 9 feet, full of details with countless figures and details, we can be confident that it did not come from a single artist's hand. What is often ignored is that until the 18th century, paintings were made in an almost industrial way in a workshop. And there's a detail that we tend to forget when we talk about art, and that is that being a professional artist is, above all, a job. This painting, specifically, is by 17th century Dutch painter Peter Paul Rubens. Rubens is not only considered today a great master, but he was also one of the most famous painters of his time. The demand for his work was so high that his workshop was a true art factory. His catalog resume lists more than 1,000 works. And we know that this painting, Achilles, discovered by Ulysses and Diomedes, was designed by Rubens. He did the sketches, that it was painted by someone else in his workshop, and that Rubens personally put the finishing touches on it. And I am going to continue with Rubens because in addition to being a very famous painter, thanks to his success and the need to manage such a large workshop, we have a lot of written evidence from his hand on how he organized the work. And this production system could become even more sophisticated. On many occasions, instead of relegating minor areas of the composition to assistants or apprentices, artists will hire genre painting specialists. We know that Rubens commissioned the painter Franz Schneiders to create floral arrangements, animals, and other still lifes. In this way, what in another painting would be a minor decorative element was elevated, making it an indispensable part of the whole. And as we can see here in the recognition of Philip Homan, this is their first of many collaborations. But we also know, however, that Rubens sketched and designed the entire painting, and that Schneiders only followed his instructions. And although it's less common, we also know that prestigious painters collaborated with each other on equal terms. Rubens had a years-long collaboration with Jan Bruegel the Elder, a very popular Dutch painter of his age. Bruegel was especially known for his landscapes, where he portrayed the society of the time. Both Rubens and Bruegel collaborated on this allegorical series that portrays the 5 senses. In this case, the terms of the collaboration were different than with the Schneiders. Rubens placed his figures in the magnificent court scenes originally created by Bruegel, and therefore, the two artists equally controlled and executed the parts of the painting more in line with their talent or specialty. See, no wonder why Rubens was so successful. The guy delivered. And today, collaborations such as Rubens and Bruegel seem to occur more often when there's a family link, as is in the case with the British twin sisters, Jane and Miss Wilson, or the Chinese-American Sue brothers, for example. But among the most popular cases of equal collaboration are couples with romantic ties. And I use the quotes because since these are generally straight couples, the glory of authorship always tends to be attributed to the man. This is the case of artists like Christo and Jean-Claude. A team of artists especially known for their land art installations, where they wrap gigantic elements in fabric, such as the Reichstag in Berlin. There's also the case of Klaas Oldenburg and Kosha van Bruggen, known for their giant sculptures of everyday objects, such as this huge gardening shovel. And going back to equality, I consulted a book on 20th century art that only cites Oldenburg, the male of the relationship, as the author of this work. And you have to dig a lot on the internet, and this cheap pun was intended, to find websites that cites Van Bruggen as co-author for this. So, despite cliche views, there has been collaboration that has existed and currently exists in art. But we have also seen that when there are several hands involved in the creation, it is very difficult to establish authorship. In art, there's not currently a formula to determine what components of the art warrants authorship. Even when we know about other people's contributions, we cannot know how much we owe each of them or whether their contributions are creatively relevant. When contributions are known, some institutions and publications have clarified some of these details. Thus, we see many works by Rubens cited with his name and workshop on the authorship line. But I insist, it is not easy, because when we talk about historical works, we do not always have written testimony of the collaborations, and most of the time we have to relegate these decisions to the expert eye of specialized scholars. And the way the art world works these days, things can get even more complicated. Until now, we have been differentiating how much an artist's hand has been involved in the creation of an artwork. But thanks to the French artist Marcel Duchamp, the concept of art went through a massive shift. It was 1917 when Duchamp presented his now famous piece, The Fountain, at an exhibition in New York. This is what was called a ready-made, an ordinary manufactured object designated by the artist as a work of art. That is, Duchamp took a regular urinal, signed it, put it on a pedestal on an art gallery, and that's it. You may understand it or not, you may like it or not, but trust me, this urinal was a total game changer. What Duchamp did was to convert the artist from a solitary genius to simply a genius with help. And this was just the beginning of art using found objects. Warhol's Brillo boxes or Tracy Emin's bed follow the same principle. None of these objects are art per se, until an artist decides they are, and they convince the art world of it. From this moment on, the value of a work of art no longer lies in the technical virtuosity of its author. The artist has now become simply an authoritative figure, and art making has become an intentional activity. So, from now on, the concept of authorship in our history becomes even more complicated, and this new intellectual genius increasingly challenges the classical parameters of artistic identity. For example, the French artist Yves Klein created what he called the anthropometry series, where he famously used nude female models covered in paint to make imprints of their bodies on large sheets of paper. He staged the making of these works as elaborate performances for an audience. But he didn't do a single brushstroke. He said, and I quote, "In this way, I stayed clean. I no longer dirtied myself with color, not even the tip of my fingers." The guy was bragging about not making the artwork. In the same line, currently, it's also very common to find artists commissioning the artwork to qualified craftsmen and directing their work through instructions or plans. This is very similar to what Rubens used to do, but in this case is even more extreme, since artists very often don't even intervene in the production. Probably the most clear example in our generation is American artist Jeff Koons, who was a stockbroker before becoming one of the most popular and rich artists alive. His work is created in his studio by a large staff that builds, paints, and fabricates his pieces. Koons is especially known for his balloon series, a giant sculpture of balloons animals like this one on the left, and also for his inclination to combine kitsch and pop culture, as we can see in this porcelain sculpture that represents Michael Jackson and his monkey bubbles. So, in this Koons example, authorship is now characterized in terms of intellectual acts, such as planning, while other contributions can be defined in terms of technical skill. Most of the time, there's not even explicit mention of this system when the works are shown in exhibitions. We never see in works like Koons captions or wall text that says things like Jeff Koons and workshop. So clearly, the ideas of authorship have changed from Rubens' times. In other words, the physical creation of a work of art no longer necessarily coincides with authorship. What all these collaborations are lacking in order to be called co-authors is the power to make appropriate decisions about the artistic properties that the work will have. When Duchamp created his fountain, he chose to use a prefabricated object. And this choice was made not for reasons of convenience, but for artistic reasons, to make a statement about the intellectual rather than manual nature of artistic creation. If he had made the urinal himself, the fountain would have been a very different work of art with a very different meaning. So, in this way, we arrive at the moment in which the authorship of an artwork falls not on the creator, but on the person who has the idea. And what is an idea? An idea isn't more than a formulated thought. And there's so much that falls under that definition that obviously just having an idea is not enough. The key now is that the idea to be regarded as creative or artistic has to be original, unique, or new. So, a work of art must be based on an original idea, something that has not been done or thought of before. And I'm sure you will agree that there is a perception that the 20th century avant-garde art restarted art with a radical break with what was done previously. As a reminder, look what Rubens used to do versus what Koons does. But every idea is a chain of ideas. We cannot be authors of something new if we don't know the old. Creativity is a cumulative act. So going back to one of our 20th century solitary white male geniuses, Picasso, this is one of his most famous artworks, known today as the Young Ladies of Avignon, but originally titled by Picasso as the Brothel of Avignon. And Picasso, you maybe were a genius, but in my opinion, not solitary enough. This work is considered the first Cubist work in history. Quite a feat, a radical creation. But Picasso could never have achieved this on his own. In a nutshell, This was possible because Picasso saw and admired the strange colors and anatomies of El Greco's opening of the Fifth Seal. This was also possible because Picasso borrowed from Ingres' naked women in the Turkish bath. And the division of planes and those unfolded volumes that he turned into the origins of Cubism would not have been possible without Picasso being a follower of Cézanne, whom he called, and I quote, my one and only master. And above all, it would not have been reached its characteristic synthetic and linear forms without the influence of African art that so inspired the avant-garde of the time. No idea, no art of creation, therefore, is wholly original. The knowledge, practices, and skills of a chosen domain must be mastered before they can be challenged. To create an original piece, it has to depart from the familiar and arrive at something new. This anchoring in tradition or in existing ideas is very important. When we are not able to hold on that familiar element, a creation can be too original. When you skip the codes that we know, we can no longer read the artwork. We cannot understand it. In fact, there have been works that have shown such a radical break that we usually say they were too ahead of their times. Check this example. This painting, called The Lock, was painted by British artist John Constable in 1824. And is a good representation of the pictorial fashion at the beginning of the 19th century. That same year, the Spanish painter Francisco de Goya painted this. This painting is called The Drowning Dog, and is part of the series painted by Goya that we know today as the Black Paintings, a group of paintings that Goya made while in exile in the walls of his house in Bordeaux. And while Goya's regular production was celebrated from the beginning of his career, the art world didn't show any interest in these other paintings until around the second half of the 20th century. And even today, they are a mystery that perhaps we will never fully understand. It needed a different society, a different mentality to be appreciated. Another example. The same year that Picasso painted this boy leading a horse, the Swedish painter Hilma af Klint painted this. Klint today is considered the first abstract artist in Western art. She broke with figurative representation years before Kandinsky, who was the artist that was considered the pioneer of abstraction for decades. In this case, Hilma knew that the world was not ready for her works, and she stipulated that her paintings could not be seen by the public until at least 20 years after her death. Because of this, her paintings were first shown in a group exhibition in 1986, and her incorporation into art history has been even more recent. Finding the balance between being predictable or ordinary and being ignored and not understood is a big challenge that many creators face. But the fight of many artists to be the first ones, the only ones, have taken a lot of them to stretch concepts of authorship, ownership of ideas, and even some moral principles. I would like to share with you a case from the art world that I think represents this struggle very well. I call it the Vantablack feud. Vantablack is a coating material developed in the UK that a few years ago was presented as the world's blackest black. It absorbs 99.9% of visible light. And as you can see in the image, because of the way it impacts the perception of the 3 dimensions of an object, this thing, more than a color, is like a black hole. It was developed initially for scientific applications, but it's easy to imagine the aesthetic potential if used in the context of an artwork. Here is where the first character of this story comes up. British artist Anish Kapoor. You might be familiar with one of the most popular artworks exhibited in Chicago, the Cloud Gate, also known by everyone else as the Bean. Kapoor is one of the most famous and wealthy artists alive. And in 2014, he got an agreement with Surrey Nanosystems, the company that has the patent and manufactures Vantablack, to be the only person to use it for artistic applications. So, he's the only artist in the world that can use the blackest black. It was no surprise that many voices in the art world complained of this. And as you can see, Kapoor came out of this deal with a brand new material and no friends. And I get it. The fact that you will use your wealth to prevent colleagues to have access to new materials to ensure that you are the only one benefiting from it, it is not nice. But it's also fair to clarify that Kapoor doesn't own a color. Actually, if this agreement never happened and artists wanted to use Vantablack, there are very limited chances that anyone would. Because Vantablack is not only not a color, it's not even a pigment. You cannot make paint with Vantablack. This material is a lab-grown series of nanotubes, and even Kapoor has stated that he has problems in both figuring out how to use it and in getting his hands on enough of the stuff. It can only be manufactured in 2 square centimeters at a time. It is incredibly expensive. You need specialized personnel and equipment to produce it. It is extremely toxic. Kapoor actually took several years to present his first creations using Vantablack. In 2018, for example, he showed in Portugal his updated installation, Descent into Limbo. He really is into transcendental titles. Basically, a dark 8 feet deep hole covered in Vantablack that reflects so little light as to give the impression of a bottomless portal. But the eye can also interpret it as a flat surface, and that is why a 60-year-old visitor fell in it and spent 4 days in the hospital. Anyway, back to the feud. Let me introduce you to the second character of this colorful telenovela, British artist Stuart Semple. Semple wasn't as famous or rich as Kapoor was, but he was able to stir up this conversation with a pretty smart and, I think, original creation. In 2016, Semple developed what he called the world's pinkest pink. On his website, basically, he states his ownership of the product and defines who can use it, which is anyone but Anish Kapoor. This got a lot of attention. And I think it's very funny, giving Kapoor a little bit of his own medicine. But the art world went bonkers when Kapoor posted this picture on his Instagram account. That is Kapoor's middle finger dipped in Semple's pigment with the caption, "Up yours, #pink." To this elegant post, Semple replied with posting a video of his 2 fingers dipped in what it looks to be Vantablack, with the captions, "Peace, #share the black." I just want to clarify that these 2 artists were 50 and 36 years old at the time, not 12. The world almost unanimously lined up and admired Semple's activism. So, we have our hero, we have our villain, and this color war even inspired other artists. And here comes the third character of this story. Spanish artist Ana Riaño. Her work reflects on the artist's identities using social media as a metaphor to raise questions about public image and copyright. So, in 2017, she painted Kapoor's and Semple's Instagram post. And Semple even praised her publicly. So now we have an artist creating artworks based on an art feud about ownership of materials. But this is not over. Because 2 years later, Semple presented on Instagram one of his newest creations, this one. Looks familiar? Well, immediately he got called out from this on Spanish Twitter, hashtag plagiarism. But my question, is it? According to Semple, absolutely not. This is more or less what Semple argued to justify what he did. He said that he was the creator of the pink in the original Instagram post, which also contains his signature on the jar. That his painting was a painting on a niche Instagram post, not a painting of Riaño's work. That Riaño painted his post containing his video art without his consent. And because Kapoor got his pink fraudulently, by making a painting of it, he was taking his pink back. There is so much to unravel here. But the main thing I want to focus on is that, indeed, there's no problem with Semple making this painting per se. He's not copying Riaño's painting, but rather they're both painting the same source, in this case, Kapoor's Instagram post. But it's also true that Riaño was the one who came up with the idea in the first place. Still, according to Semple, what makes this argument valid is what the picture is portraying: his own product, the pink, and his signature on the jar lid. I am not a copyright lawyer, and I don't know if you can legally make this claim, but I think that the point here lays on an element that kept coming throughout this talk. And that is that today, we think that the key for a transcendent artwork is the idea, and that idea has to be an original one. In this Vanta Black feud, we've seen 3 artists' attempts to achieve originality, even if that made them break in traditional concepts of authorship and ownership. We've seen Kapoor playing with materiality, exclusivity, perception, and sometimes public safety. Or Semple transforming activism into art statements about ownership, moral values, and even contributing with new materials for everyone to use, if you are not Anish Kapoor. And also Riaño, tweaking the borders between traditional and digital art while reflecting on issues about identity and public image in the world of social media. We've seen that to determine authorship and ownership of ideas in recent years has gotten very complicated. And that maybe we only need to look back to the past to remember that creativity and creation always has been, at the end, a collective effort. But our cult for originality in our restricted modern way is going to be very difficult to let go, because that clashes with our romantic ideas of genius. Circling back to one of the artworks that I mentioned before, if you remember this work by British artist Tracey Emin, it's called My Bed, and it was exhibited in the Tate Gallery in 1999. And despite being the finalist of the Turner Prize, many critics call it a farce and claim that anyone could exhibit an unmade bed. And what Emin replied to these claims was, well, they didn't. day, no one had ever done that before. And with these words from Tracy Emin, I want to thank all of you for being here and wish you a wonderful few days at the conference. Thank you.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much. We do have some time for some questions. If anyone has any, I think we're going to have a microphone going around.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a great example. Yeah. Yeah.
And again, always the
Exactly.
women led behind at that time still, sometimes.
Yeah. That example is even worse because Rodan actually stole her work and just presented as his own. So, and that's not the only example in the history of art, unfortunately. Yes.
And I will say take advantage of the emotion that they have between them. They were,
Yeah.
partners and
When there's
emotional partners.
romantic ties in between, usually there's a manipulative side, and yeah, it's unfortunately easy for those abuses to happen. Yeah.
It was a fantastic talk.
Thank you.
It struck a chord with me because I often think about how some of these old pieces are restored.
Mm-hmm.
And the process of restoration is kind of a piece of what we're here over the next couple of days. And I'm curious to know, how are people that are part of that process of restoration of old piece of art, understanding the history, but also understanding what tools they have to bring that art back to life? And I don't know if maybe they are the unsung heroes. I don't know, but is there any comments that you have?
Yeah,
about that?
it's a very complex subject. The philosophy these days is to try to restore these works in a way that is always reversible. So you cannot be, so in the past, actually what a lot of restorers do when they clean paintings is that they realize that there was something painted on top. Maybe in the 18th century or 19th century or beginning of the 20th century, just because they try to make it nicer or looking more according to the fashion of the time. So that happens a lot. So today, actually, if you are restoring an oil painting, usually instead of using oil, you use watercolor, so it can be removed. And also, you don't paint in a way that you're trying to deceive the art. If you see a painting that is being restored, you need to know that that's a restoration. There's a way where you paint with dots and with lines. Next time you go to an art museum, you should pay attention to that, because when you know it, it's very obvious to see. And you can tell the parts of the painting that once were gone and have been worked on back into. And sometimes also we don't have information of the part that it's been gone and what was there. So usually restorers do like some abstraction thing, like a mass of color, just to make it a little bit more pleasant to the eye, but not lying to the viewer of what was done previously by the original artist.
So thank you again. A wonderful, wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
I was listening to a debate recently about the threat to artists. I'm sure you've talked about this, of generative artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
The consensus was there is no threat. The artist will always be an essential part of this. But I think that your example of how social media really blurs the line will also happen here. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are as to how that will truly change of even what we think of as creativity or originality.
It is an incredibly complex subject, because we're in a time where every day we wake up with something new going on that adds on into this chain of problems adding on. And the problem with AIs is they borrow from artists' works already. So what they're doing is not, I don't think it's morally okay. Also is cheap, if not free, to do it. So if you don't have any problems with or any moral values, you're going to, so I do think that threatens artists, because actually a lot of people is already accepting works that are obviously generated instead of commission artists for their work. The problem with social media is that there's too many layers there, because like in the example of the Vanta Black feud, where Semple was saying that he had the right to paint that because the photograph was showing his product and his signature. But that picture was taken by Anish Kapoor. So actually the owner of the image is Anish Kapoor. I don't think, and again, I'm not an expert, I don't think you can claim, oh, this is me, or like, this picture is me because I'm there. I was photobombing from behind, and so that's my image now. So that's the problem. At the same time, he's complaining that Riaño shouldn't have done the second painting of Semple's video doing this, because that was his video art. And she was copying his video art. So actually, I think we're learning every day, and I think probably we're not ready to really judge these cases. And I think, I mean, I think the future of the law is in these copyrights problems, because this, when it goes to court, is usually long trials, because you can twist it in so many ways, and it's so new that we're just, there's not even laws that stipulate, like in a case like this, who's right. So very complicated.
Fantastic talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wasn't Keith Haring famous for exploiting this notion of whether he did the art or someone in his shop did the art, or whether it was a forgery, and whether he approved of the forgery or not, and the value would fluctuate over real orders of magnitude?
Well,
and then is there an attempt to protect collectors on the value, or is it the Wild West and we just don't care?
Yeah, that is also a big topic. I'm more familiar with Warhol doing that. Warhol, actually, his workshop was called by him the factory. So he wasn't hiding anything. He was actually, and also he invented the screen print technique, which basically allows you to do copies and copies and copies of the same thing. So he was actually playing with that. How much value we want to give to those artworks? Again, the art world still is a cult of the individual. So we still value names more than anything else. So that's something we have to deal with. But even like with forgeries, like we know for sure that Dali, when he was older and he was like not able to produce absolutely anything, he was signing papers with his signature, and someone else would put an artwork there, and those are in the market. People bought them. I actually think my grandma has one. So that's there. You have to make the decision if you want to play that game or not. You can buy art because you like it, or you can buy art for speculation, and that part is where the risk comes.
Very good, thank you.
I love the parallels that you drew between the art world and the science world. Just an incredible task to engage an audience of scientists with a talk on art. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
The question I had pertains to money. You talked about the fame part of, claiming ownership of art for the fame, for the glory. But in science, in addition to the fame, we are also competing for money. We are trying to leverage originality, fame, the name that we have in the field for money, I'm sure the artists historically also competed to get the job. So could you talk a little bit about the money part and how artists historically competed for the resources in terms of earning their livelihood by securing art jobs?
Yeah. Well, the money part is there's not much money for artists in general. Only a few privileged ones get the jobs. And actually, I mentioned several of them. Kapoor himself is a very, very wealthy artist, and he gets very grandiose commissions, and he sells a lot. I do actually like his work, not all of it, but I like it a lot. So I can see part of that being justified. Jeff Koons, who does the balloon animals and Michael Jackson figurines, he was a stockbroker before becoming an artist. I don't think he knows how to draw absolutely anything. So he is the clearest example of the art factory of our days, even more than Warhol, because Warhol actually had background. He was a great artist. Jeff Koons, I mean, we can call him an artist, of course, he is, but he doesn't do this stuff. He really has a factory, and he's all for the money. He's been, actually, the art market hasn't been always kind to him because he takes big risks, and sometimes his collections, the problem is he also puts a lot of money in producing the art. So sometimes that hasn't worked for him, but he always has a big, big idea to come back. And actually, the other day on the news, I could see that he is going to be the first artist having an artwork on the moon. So yeah, he got that commission. So yeah, money is very important for artists. We all have bills to pay.
All right, thank you. One more time. Thank you. Okay, now that we really have our creative juices going, I would like to invite all of you to go out onto the foyer to grab a plate and some dinner. Keep the discussion going. I believe Anna will be around, so I'm sure there are more questions. So please be willing to reach out. And then we will come back here at 6:55 for the next portion of our evening event.